I thought I was walking into my 30th birthday party, but I walked into a trial where love was converted into a spreadsheet. They placed the DNA results on the table like a death sentence, waiting for me to break, but they did not know a stranger in the crowd had spotted a lie big enough to flip the whole board. When she stood up, everything changed. My name is Lucy Hughes, and I'm currently sitting on the floor of a one-bedroom apartment that smells like cardboard and stale coffee. There is a half-packed box next to my knee, filled with books I have not read in years and photographs I'm terrified to look at. I have been sitting here for 2 hours, staring at a patch of peeling paint on the wall, trying to figure out how a person restarts their existence when the foundation has been ripped out from under them. I do not owe anyone this story. That is the first thing I need to say, mostly to remind myself. For the last 3 weeks, since the night of my 30th birthday, I have felt a crushing pressure to remain silent. It is a heavy, suffocating blanket of shame that does not even belong to me. Yet I am the one wearing it. People love to talk about the truth. They talk about it like it is a cleansing rain, something holy and pure that washes away the lies. They tell you that you should be grateful for the truth, no matter how sharp its edges are. They say, "At least now you know." But they do not tell you that sometimes the truth is not a relief. Sometimes the truth is a demolition ball that swings through your living room without warning, leaving you standing in the wreckage while everyone else watches from the sidewalk, fascinated by the dust. I'm not writing this because I'm grateful. I am writing this because silence, in my specific case, feels too much like a lie. If I stay quiet, I am letting them write the ending. I am letting them file me away as a mistake they finally corrected, a clerical error they shredded and tossed into the bin. And I refuse to be a clerical error. There is a blue sweater sitting on top of the pile of clothes destined for donation. It is a soft, expensive cashmere, the kind of blue that looks like the ocean on a travel brochure. My mother bought it for me last Christmas. In fact, almost everything I own is some shade of blue. My bed sheets are navy. My car is sky blue. The walls of my old bedroom were painted a soft periwinkle. For 30 years, I have told people that blue is my favorite color. I said it on first dates. I said it in icebreaker games at corporate retreats. Hi, I am Lucy, and my favorite color is blue. Now, looking at that sweater, a terrifying question claws at my throat. Do I actually like blue? Or did I just like it because she told me it looked good on me? Did I like it because it was easier to agree, to wear the color she picked out, to be the person she dressed, rather than risk the subtle, chilling disappointment that came with making a choice she did not approve of? It seems like such a small, stupid thing to obsess over while my life is falling apart, but it is the thread that, if pulled, unravels the whole tapestry. If I do not even know if I like the color blue, what else about me is a fabrication? I turned 30 last month. That number, 30, was supposed to be the threshold. I had spent my 20s grinding, working 60-hour weeks, climbing the ladder at Arbor Crest Compliance Group. I work in risk management and compliance. My entire career is built on the ability to foresee disaster, to read the fine print, to ensure that every rule is followed so that the structure does not collapse. I am good at it. I am meticulous. I spent 10 years building a reputation as the woman who catches the details everyone else misses. I had just closed a massive project, a compliance audit that saved the firm nearly $2 million in potential fines. I felt powerful. I felt like I had finally paid my dues and earned my place in the adult world. I thought my 30th birthday would be a celebration of that stability. I thought I was walking into a party that would acknowledge, finally, that Lucy Hughes had made it. I was ready to drink expensive wine and maybe, just maybe, receive a rare compliment from my father about my promotion. My parents were never the type of people who threw wild parties or showered me with affection. We were not a family of hugs. We were a family of firm handshakes and polite nods. My father is a man who treats conversation like a deposition, offering information only when necessary. He is tall, always impeccably dressed in gray or charcoal, with eyes that assess rather than observe. My mother is the perfect counterpart, a woman of rigid aesthetics and tightly controlled emotions. She does not yell. She does not cry. She sighs. She sighs with the weight of a martyr who is constantly disappointed by the world's inability to meet her standards. Growing up, I learned quickly that peace was a currency, and the price was perfection. I bought my safety with report cards that showed straight A's. I bought their approval by being the quiet child, the one who never came home past curfew, the one who never asked for money, the one who made herself as low maintenance as a piece of furniture. I sculpted myself into the daughter they wanted. I polished my edges until I was smooth and non-threatening. I thought that was the deal. I thought that if I followed their unwritten rules, if I became the successful, independent professional they demanded, I would be safe. I thought I was investing in a future where we would eventually be friends, or at least equals. I did not know that to them. I was not an investment. I was an expense, and they were just waiting for the fiscal year to end so they could cut their losses. The most painful part of what happened is not the biology. I need to be clear about that. Biology is just science. DNA is just a sequence of proteins. If they had sat me down over coffee, tears in their eyes, and told me that I was adopted, or that there had been a mistake at the hospital, or that I was the child of a relative they took in, I would have been shocked. Yes, I would have been hurt, but I would have understood. I would have hugged them. We could have navigated that storm together. Families are messy. I know that. I could have forgiven a lie told out of fear or love, but this was not that. This was not a confession born of guilt. This was an ambush. They staged it. That is the part that keeps me awake at 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling until my eyes burn. They planned my humiliation with the same meticulous attention to detail that they used to plan their annual tax filings. They invited people. They set the time. They prepared the documents. My father must have printed that spreadsheet days in advance. He must have checked the ink levels in the printer. My mother must have organized the catering, choosing the hors d'oeuvres while knowing exactly what was going to happen before the first appetizer was served. They let me drive home, thinking I was going to a celebration, while they were waiting behind the door with a guillotine. It takes a specific kind of malice to weaponize a birthday. It takes a profound lack of humanity to look at the child you raised for 3 decades and see nothing but a defendant in a lawsuit you are eager to win. I keep replaying the drive over there. I was listening to a podcast, humming along to the intro music, thinking about the bottle of Pinot Noir I had in the passenger seat. It was a $20 bottle, decent but not flashy, exactly the kind of practical gift my parents would approve of. I was happy. That is the tragedy of it. I was genuinely, stupidly happy. I felt like I was on solid ground. I had no idea that the ground was actually a trapdoor, and they were standing by the lever, checking their watches, waiting for the second hand to hit the mark. When I look back at my childhood now, through the lens of that night, the memories warp. I see the coldness not as a personality trait, but as a strategy. I see the lack of photos of me around the house not as minimalism, but as a lack of attachment. I see the way my mother never really looked at me, but rather looked past me, as if she was tolerating a guest who had overstayed their welcome by 20 years. I wonder how long they knew. I wonder if they looked at me across the dinner table when I was 10, or 16, or 25, and discussed when they would finally get rid of me. Did they have a countdown? Did they mark the days off on a calendar? The cruelty of it is breathless. It is so vast that I can barely comprehend the edges of it. They wanted to break me. They did not just want to sever the tie. They wanted to burn the bridge, salt the earth, and ensure that I would never have the strength to look them in the eye again. They wanted me to leave that house feeling like nothing. They wanted me to feel like a fraud, a thief who had stolen their resources for 30 years. And the terrifying thing is, it almost worked. When I stood in that kitchen, surrounded by aunts, uncles, and cousins who were staring at me with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity, I felt my reality dissolving. I felt the shame rising up my throat like bile. I was ready to accept their verdict. I was ready to believe that I was the villain of the story, that I was a parasite who had unknowingly drained them dry. My training at Arborcrest taught me to respect documentation, to bow before the weight of evidence, and there they were, holding the evidence, looking so sure, so righteous. My father's voice was so steady, my mother's silence was so loud. Who was I to argue with them? Who was I to scream? If I had walked out of that house alone, I think I would have driven my car off the road. I say that with zero drama and 100% clinical detachment. I would have shattered. I would have accepted the narrative that I was worthless, and I would have disappeared just like they wanted. But the universe has a strange sense of humor. Or perhaps it just hates loose ends. Because my parents, in their arrogance, made one critical mistake. They assumed that everyone in the room would play their assigned role. They assumed that the audience would sit quietly and watch the execution. They assumed that because they had money and status and the proof, no one would dare to question the script. They forgot that the world is not a spreadsheet. They forgot that you cannot control every variable, no matter how much you plan. They did not expect the woman in the gray suit. She was not family. She was not a friend. I did not even know her name when the night started. But she was the glitch in their perfect system. She was the one person who looked at the table, looked at the paper, and saw what no one else was looking for. She saw the detail that was wrong, not just a little wrong, wrong enough to pull the whole lie down. If that night had gone according to their plan, I would be gone. But because of her, because of that one voice that cut through the silence, I am still here. I am sitting on this floor, surrounded by boxes, terrified and heartbroken. But I am here, and I'm starting to realize that the story they tried to tell about me was not the end. It was just the prologue to something much darker, and much more important. They wanted a trial. They wanted to present their case. Well, they are going to get one. But they are not the judges anymore, and I am certainly not the defendant. I am Lucy Hughes. I am 30 years old. I hate the color blue, and I am done being quiet. The drive out to Oakbridge usually took 40 minutes. But tonight the highway felt like a conveyor belt designed solely for my convenience. The traffic lights dissolved into a seamless string of greens, and the late October air rushing through my cracked window carried the crisp, smoky scent of burning leaves. It was the kind of evening that tricked you into believing the world was orderly. I had a bottle of Pinot Noir in the passenger seat, a $20 vintage I had picked up at a gas station winery on the way. It was not impressive, but it was reliable, much like I was trying to be. I tapped my fingers against the steering wheel to the rhythm of a classic rock station, thinking about the checklist I had mentally drafted for my 30s. Item 1 was already done. Survive the compliance audit at Arborcrest without getting fired or developing an ulcer. Item 2 was to actually start saving for a house. Something modest with a porch where I could drink coffee and pretend to enjoy gardening. Item 3 was to fix the relationship with my parents. Not fix it in the sense of grand emotional breakthroughs or weeping apologies, but fix it like you fix a leaky faucet. Tighten the washers, stop the dripping, and make it functional enough to ignore. I turned off the main road and guided my Honda down the winding streets of the subdivision where I grew up. The houses here were all variations of the same architectural dream: brick facades, manicured lawns that looked like green carpet, and driveways wide enough to land a small aircraft. It was a neighborhood of quiet wealth, the kind that whispered rather than shouted. As I approached the cul-de-sac, I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. The phantom corset of expectations I always wore when I visited home, but I breathed through it. This was just dinner, a quick meal, a polite exchange of updates, maybe a slice of cake if Mother was feeling festive, and then I would be back in my own bed by 10. Then I saw the cars. At first, my brain refused to process the visual data. My parents did not host. They did not have friends over on weeknights. They certainly did not fill their driveway and the street in front of their house with a fleet of sedans and SUVs. I slowed the car to a crawl, my headlights sweeping over the metal lineup. I recognized Uncle Miller's heavy-duty truck, parked with 2 wheels on the grass, a violation that would normally send my father into a fit of rage. I saw my Aunt Janice's beige station wagon. There were cars I did not recognize. 2 generic rentals. dark sedans that looked official and unfriendly. My heart hammered against my ribs, skipping a beat and then doubling its pace. This was not a party. My parents would never throw a surprise party. They considered surprises to be a form of rudeness. The only logical explanation was a disaster. My mind immediately began constructing worst-case scenarios with terrifying speed. Dad had a heart attack. Mom had a stroke. There had been a fire in the kitchen that didn't show from the outside. Someone was dead. The silence of the house, looming dark against the twilight sky, felt ominous. I parked my car haphazardly behind the line of vehicles, not caring that I was blocking the mailbox. I grabbed the bottle of wine out of reflex, my fingers gripping the glass neck like a baton, and ran toward the house. I bypassed the front door. The front door was for guests, for strangers, for the census taker. Family went through the garage. I punched the 4-digit code into the keypad mounted on the frame. My birthday, a code they had never bothered to change, and the heavy door groaned upward. The smell hit me instantly, and it almost brought me to my knees with relief. It was the smell of safety. It was a specific cocktail of motor oil, cedar sawdust, and the faint, sweet chemical tang of lawn fertilizer. This was my father's domain. The garage was the one place in the house where his rigidity softened into a form of organized tinkering. His tools were hung on the pegboard with military precision, outlines drawn in black marker so he would know if a wrench was missing. The concrete floor was swept clean. The air was cool and still. I walked past the workbench, my heels clicking on the cement, the sound echoing slightly in the enclosed space. I took a deep breath, letting the familiar scent ground me. It is okay, I told myself. If there were an ambulance, it would be in the driveway. If there were police, there would be lights. This is just a gathering. Maybe a family meeting. Maybe someone is getting divorced and they needed a summit. I reached for the door handle that led into the kitchen. The metal was cold under my palm. I prepared my face. I engaged the muscles around my mouth to form a smile of concern, ready to pivot to a smile of greeting depending on what I found. I turned the knob and pushed. I expected noise. I expected the cacophony of a family crisis. Aunt Janice's shrill voice, Uncle Miller's booming laugh, the clatter of silverware, the hiss of the coffee maker. Instead, I walked into a wall of silence so thick it felt pressurized. The kitchen was bright, aggressively so. All the recessed lights were on, casting a sterile operating room glare over the granite countertops. The room was full of people. There must have been 20 of them, maybe more, squeezed into the open-plan space that connected the kitchen to the living area. But nobody was moving, nobody was eating, nobody was holding a drink. They were standing in loose clusters, like statues in a museum storage room. As the door clicked shut behind me, every single head turned in my direction. I froze. My hand was still gripping the neck of the cheap wine bottle, and suddenly it felt ridiculous, like a prop from a different play. I looked from face to face, searching for a cue. I saw my cousin Sarah, who usually greeted me with a tackle hug. Looking at her shoes, I saw Aunt Janice, her arms crossed so tightly over her chest that her knuckles were white. I saw neighbors I had not spoken to in 5 years. Their expressions were unreadable. They were not sad. They were not happy. They were waiting. "Mom?" I said. My voice sounded small, thin, and entirely inadequate for the size of the room. My mother was standing near the island, wiping a spot on the marble that was already clean. She was wearing her navy blue hosting cardigan, the one with the pearl buttons, and her hair was coiffed into its usual immovable helmet of blonde gray. She heard me. I saw her shoulders stiffen, but she did not look up. She kept rubbing the counter, her eyes fixed on the invisible stain. Her lips pressed into a line so thin it had almost vanished. It was a look I knew well. It was the look of someone avoiding a collision she had already caused. "Dad?" I tried again, pivoting to the right. My father was standing by the fireplace in the adjacent living area, dominating the room. He was not wearing his casual evening clothes. He was in a suit, minus the tie, his shirt collar unbuttoned just enough to show the tendons in his neck. He was holding a file. It was not a manila folder or a loose stack of papers. It was a thick bound dossier with a clear plastic cover and a black spiral binding. He held it with both hands, resting it against his chest like a shield, or perhaps a weapon he was keeping holstered until the right moment. He was looking at me, but there was no warmth in his gaze. There was no "happy birthday, sweetheart." There was no "glad you made it." His eyes were flat. They were assessing me, scanning me from my windblown hair down to my scuffed work shoes, cataloging my presence as if I were a data point that had finally arrived to complete a set. The silence stretched out, agonizing and bizarre. The only sound in the room was the low hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Each second felt like a countdown. My brain scrambled to find a rational explanation. They are playing a joke. I thought desperately, this is some kind of high-concept surprise party. Any second now, someone is going to yell, "Surprise!" and the tension will break, and we will all laugh about how scared I looked. But the air in the room did not taste like a joke. It tasted like ozone. It tasted like the moments before a thunderstorm breaks, when the sky turns that bruised purple color and the birds stop singing. "Is everything okay?" I asked, taking a tentative step forward. "Is someone sick?" My father cleared his throat. The sound was sharp, like a gavel striking wood. "We are all healthy, Lucy," he said. His voice was calm, measured, and completely devoid of affection. It was his boardroom voice. It was the voice he used when he was explaining to a junior executive why their employment was being terminated for cause. I looked back at my mother. "Mom, what is going on? Why are all these people here?" She finally stopped scrubbing the counter. She lifted her head. But she looked past my left ear, staring at a point on the wall behind me. Her eyes were glassy, not with tears, but with a strange, brittle resolve. She looked like a woman who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in front of a mirror and was now terrified she would forget her lines. "We thought it was time," she said, her voice trembling slightly before smoothing out into a practiced monotone. "We thought it was time to clear the ledger." The ledger, the word hung in the air, foreign and sharp. I looked around the room again. I realized then that the arrangement of the people was not random. They were not guests. They were a jury. They had been briefed. They knew something I did not. And they were watching me with a mixture of morbid fascination and collective judgment. The warmth I had felt in the garage, that smell of oil and home, evaporated completely. The kitchen felt freezing. I could feel the blood draining from my face. This was not a medical emergency. This was not a party. My father took a step away from the fireplace, moving into the center of the room. He placed the thick file on the heavy oak dining table. The thud it made against the wood was soft, but in the silence, it sounded like a gunshot. "Put the wine down, Lucy," he said. It was not a request. I set the bottle on the counter next to me. My hands were shaking. I clasped them together to hide the tremor. "I don't understand," I said. And I hated how pleading I sounded. I was 30 years old. I was a senior compliance officer. I managed risk for a living. And yet, standing in my childhood kitchen, I felt like I was 6 years old and had just broken a vase. "What is that file?" My father rested his hand on the plastic cover. "This," he said, "is the truth, and it is long past due." I looked at the file. I could see the edge of a spreadsheet peeking out from the first page. I could see numbers, columns, dates. I looked at my mother again, begging her silently to stop this, to step in and be the parent, to tell me that this was all a misunderstanding, but she had turned her back to me. She was pouring herself a glass of water from the fridge dispenser, the mechanical whirring sound filling the void. She was checking out. She was leaving me alone in the center of the room. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. They had not invited these people here to celebrate me. They had invited them here to witness something. It was a performance, a public shaming. And I was not the guest of honor. I was the sacrifice. The house I had driven to, the one with the smell of cedar and the wide driveway, was gone. In its place was a courtroom, and the trial had already begun before I even walked through the door. The file lay on the oak table between us, an inert object that seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. My father's hand rested on top of it, his manicured fingernails tapping a slow, rhythmic cadence against the plastic cover. The sound was dry, like a beetle hitting a windowpane. "Open it," he said. I looked at my mother. She was still gripping her glass of water, her knuckles white, her eyes fixed on the floor tiles. She looked like a statue of a woman in distress, carved from ice and rapidly melting under the heat of the kitchen lights. She would not look at me. That was the first verdict. I reached out and flipped the cover. I expected legal documents. I expected a lawsuit, perhaps, or a deed to the house, or even a medical diagnosis. What I saw was a spreadsheet. It was printed in landscape orientation. The font small and precise. Arial, size 10. The header at the top was bolded and underlined. L. Expenses 1995 to present. My brain stuttered. I tried to read the columns, but the numbers swam before my eyes. Date, description, category, cost, adjusted for inflation. "What is this?" I whispered. "Read the first entry," my father commanded. I looked down. October 14th, 1995. Medical, labor and delivery complications, out-of-pocket deductibles. I moved my finger down the list. June, 1998. Preschool tuition, August, 2001. Emergency room, fractured radius, December, 2003. Piano lessons, July, 2008. Orthodontics, Phase 1. It was my life. It was my entire existence, reduced to a series of debit transactions. Every memory I had was there, but stripped of its context, stripped of its emotion, and converted into a dollar sign. I remembered breaking my arm in the second grade. I remembered the pain, the fear, and how my dad had carried me to the car. I remembered thinking he was my hero. But on this paper, that moment was not about heroism or comfort. It was an entry, $450. I saw the piano lessons I had hated but taken because my mother wanted a musical child. $2,000. I saw the summer camp where I had my first kiss. $1,200. I saw the dress I wore to prom. $200. The list went on for pages. It was thicker than a novel. It detailed the cost of my food, my clothing, my education, even the gas money they had given me when I drove back to college. At the bottom of the final page, there was a bold figure, a sum so large it looked like a telephone number. "We have been generous," my father said. His voice was flat, lacking any inflection. It was the voice of a man reading a quarterly earnings report that had fallen short of projections. "We have been exceptionally generous, considering the circumstances." "Generous?" I choked out. "Dad, this is you kept receipts? For raising me?" "We kept records," he corrected. "Compliance. Lucy, you know about compliance. You keep records when you want to ensure the investment is sound." He reached over and flipped the tab to the second section of the dossier. The spreadsheet disappeared, replaced by a document with a medical letterhead. It was a DNA test result. The logo belonged to a lab I had never heard of, something generic and online. I stared at the colorful bar graphs, the percentages, the scientific jargon that essentially boiled down to a single, devastating sentence. Probability of paternity, 0%. Probability of maternity, 0%. The room went absolutely still. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. I could hear the breathing of the 20 people standing behind me. I felt like the floor had opened up and I was falling through the center of the earth. "The hospital made a mistake," my father said. He did not sound angry. He did not sound sad. He sounded like he was explaining a shipping error. 30 years ago, there was a mix-up. We suspected it for some time. You never looked like us. You never acted like us. You were always different, too emotional, too chaotic." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and his eyes were voids. "We confirmed it last week," he continued. You are not a Hughes. You are a stranger, and we are done paying for a stranger. I looked at my mother again. Mom, I begged. Mom, please. She finally looked up. Her face was pale, her lips trembling. For a second, I thought she was going to rush to me. I thought she was going to scream that she did not care about the biology, that I was her daughter, that she had nursed me and raised me and loved me. But she didn't. She looked at the spreadsheet, then she looked at the DNA test, and then she looked at her husband. She took a deep breath, smoothed the front of her cardigan, and nodded. It was a small, jerky motion, like a marionette being pulled by a string. It is too much money. Lucy, she whispered, we cannot keep pouring water into a bucket that isn't ours. The silence that followed was shattered by a sound that made my skin crawl. Clap, clap, clap. Someone was clapping. It was slow, rhythmic applause. I turned around, dazed. It was Uncle Miller. He was nodding, a grim expression on his face, clapping his heavy hands together. Then Aunt Janice joined in. Then a neighbor. It was not the applause of celebration. It was the applause of agreement. It was the sound of a jury delivering a guilty verdict. They were validating the logic. They were looking at the spreadsheet, looking at the DNA, and nodding. Yes, the math adds up. Yes, cut the loss. I stood there, paralyzed. The betrayal was so absolute, so swift, that my brain could not process it. 10 minutes ago, I was their daughter. Now, I was a bad investment. There was no screaming match. There were no tears. There was just a business decision, executed with brutal efficiency in front of witnesses. They had brought an audience to ensure that the severance was public, that the narrative was set before I could even open my mouth. We are not unreasonable, my father said, closing the dossier with a finality that echoed in the room. We are not throwing you out on the street without notice. He pointed a finger toward the mudroom door. Near the garage entrance where I had come in, sitting there, looking small and pathetic against the wall, was my old high school gym bag. It was a faded navy duffel with the school mascot peeling off the side. Your mother packed a bag for you, he said. Essentials only. You have 1 hour to vacate the premises. The rest of your things, the items we purchased, will be liquidated to recoup a fraction of the costs listed in that document. I looked at the bag. That was the knife that finally found its mark. The DNA was a shock. The spreadsheet was an insult, but the bag meant they had been in my room, while I was at work, while I was driving here thinking about birthday cake. My mother had walked into the bedroom I grew up in. She had opened my drawers. She had decided what I was allowed to keep. She had folded my clothes, not with love, but with the efficiency of someone clearing out a rental unit. She had packed me up before I even arrived. 1 hour, I repeated, my voice hollow. 1 hour, my father confirmed. After that, we change the locks. If you cause a scene, we call the police. We have the documentation to prove you have no legal right to be here. I felt my knees buckle. I reached out and grabbed the edge of the granite island to steady myself. The room was spinning. The faces of my family, my former family, blurred into a kaleidoscope of judgment. They looked like strangers. No, worse than strangers. Strangers would have pity. These people had receipts. I was going to fall. I was going to collapse right there on the kitchen floor, and they would probably step over me to get to the hors d'oeuvres. I could feel the darkness encroaching at the edges of my vision. I was a fraud. I was a mistake. I was nothing. Excuse me. The voice cut through the thick atmosphere like a scalpel. It was not loud, but it was incredibly distinct. It was cool, professional, and possessed a timbre of authority that made everyone stop. I blinked, trying to clear my vision. A woman was standing up in the corner of the room, near the pantry. I had not noticed her when I came in. She was wearing a sharp gray suit that looked out of place among the casual suburban attire of the other guests. She had dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, and she wore rimless glasses that caught the light. She did not look like she belonged in this kitchen. She looked like she belonged in a boardroom, or a laboratory. "Who are you?" my father asked, his brow furrowing. He did not like variables he had not accounted for. I am Dr. Sloan Mercer, the woman said. She stepped forward, her heels clicking on the tile with a deliberate, rhythmic sound. She moved through the crowd, and the guests parted for her like water. I came with your cousin, Mr. Henderson. He mentioned there might be a genetic discussion tonight, and since that is my field, he thought I might find it interesting. She reached the table. She did not look at me. She did not look at my parents. She looked solely at the dossier. You are a geneticist? My father asked, his tone shifting slightly, becoming more deferential to a fellow professional. Then you understand. The data is irrefutable. Doctor. Sloan Mercer reached out and picked up the dossier. She did not ask for permission. She flipped it open to the DNA section. Her eyes scanned the page, moving back and forth with rapid precision. She tilted her head slightly, adjusting her glasses. My father puffed out his chest. As you can see, the markers are decisive. 0%. It is a clear case of hospital error. Doctor. Mercer let out a soft hum. It was a sound of contemplation, not agreement. She looked up from the paper, and for the first time, she looked at my father. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a glint in her eyes that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was the look of a predator who had just spotted a limp. It is certainly a very thorough presentation, she said. Her voice was smooth, calm, and terrifyingly neutral. The spreadsheet is impressive. The narrative is compelling. She dropped the dossier back onto the table. It landed with a slap that was louder than the applause had been. However, she said, and she let the word hang there for a second, letting the silence build again. There is a problem with your evidence. Problem? My father scoffed. I assure you, the lab is accredited. I am not talking about the accreditation, Doctor, Mercer said. She placed a single finger on the colorful bar graph that my father had been so proud of. I am talking about the science. I have been a genetic counselor for 15 years. I have reviewed thousands of these reports. She looked around the room, making eye contact with the jury, then settled her gaze back on my parents. This report, she said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming deadly serious. It has a significant irregularity. In fact, if I didn't know better, I would say it contains a biological impossibility. My father's face went rigid. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. The room, which had been waiting for my execution, suddenly felt like the air pressure had dropped before a tornado. Doctor. Mercer turned to me then. It was the first time she acknowledged my existence. Her eyes were dark and intelligent, and for a fleeting second, I saw something in them that I had not seen all night. I saw an ally. Don't pick up that bag, Lucy, she said softly. Then she turned back to my father, her voice sharpening into a blade. Because I don't think this document proves she is a stranger. I think it proves something else entirely. I did not wait for my father to respond to Dr. Mercer. I did not wait for my mother to gasp or for the jury of relatives to murmur in confusion. The air in that kitchen had become toxic, a poisonous gas that was rapidly filling my lungs, and my only instinct was survival. I needed to get out before I suffocated. I reached out and grabbed the dossier from the table. My father made a flinch, a small twitch of his hand as if to stop me, but he was too distracted by the woman in the gray suit to actually intercept the motion. I tucked the heavy plastic file under my arm, right against my ribs where my heart was beating a frantic, erratic rhythm. Then, I turned and walked toward the mudroom door where the gym bag sat. Walking across that room felt like wading through deep water. It was only 20 feet, but it felt like miles. I passed Uncle Miller, the man who had taught me how to fish when I was 7. He was staring intently at a bowl of untouched potato salad. I passed my cousin Sarah, who I had shared a bunk bed with during summer vacations. She was scrolling on her phone, her thumb moving rapidly, aggressively ignoring the reality of the woman walking past her. It was a graveyard. That is the only way to describe it. I was walking through a cemetery of relationships. Every person I passed was a tombstone marking a connection that had died the moment my father placed that spreadsheet on the table. They were not my family anymore. They were just people who knew a version of me that had been recalled by the manufacturer. I picked up the navy duffel bag. It was lighter than I expected. My mother said she had packed the essentials, and apparently, in her mind, the essentials of my life weighed less than 15 pounds. I did not say goodbye. I did not slam the door. I simply turned the handle, stepped out into the garage, and let the door click shut behind me. The sound was final. It was the period at the end of a very long, very painful sentence. I walked to my car, threw the bag and the dossier into the passenger seat, and keyed the ignition. My hands were numb. I could not feel the steering wheel. I backed out of the driveway, maneuvering around the obstacle course of family vehicles, and drove away. I did not look in the rearview mirror. I knew that if I looked back and saw the house, saw the warm yellow light spilling from the windows where they were all still standing, I would crash the car. I drove for an hour with no destination. I just needed motion. I needed the physical sensation of moving forward to counteract the feeling that my life was sliding backward into an abyss. I ended up on the interstate, heading north, away from the suburbs and into the industrial sprawl that bordered the city. I pulled into the parking lot of a place called the Silver Spoon. It was one of those 24-hour diners that exist outside of time, a beacon of neon and grease located next to a truck stop. It was the kind of place where nobody asks why you are alone on your birthday, or why you look like you have just escaped a natural disaster. I sat in a booth at the back, the red vinyl cracked and taped over with silver duct tape. A waitress named Darlene, according to her name tag, dropped a laminated menu in front of me. She looked tired, her hair pulled back in a fraying scrunchie, and she smelled like coffee grounds and cigarette smoke. "What can I get you, hun?" she asked, her pen hovering over a notepad. I looked at the menu. The words blurred. I was not hungry. My stomach felt like it was tied in a complex nautical knot. But I needed to do something normal. I needed to perform a human function to prove I still existed. "I will have the banana split," I said, "and a side of onion rings." Darlene did not blink. She did not judge. "Whipped cream on the rings, or just the split?" she cracked. A dry, rasping chuckle escaping her throat. "Just the split," I said. "And coffee? Black?" When she walked away, I was left alone with the objects on the table: a sugar dispenser, a bottle of ketchup, and the dossier. I opened the file again. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of the diner, the spreadsheet looked even more grotesque. It was a masterpiece of pettiness. I flipped through the pages, forcing myself to look at the numbers. August, 2004. Summer reading books, $56.30. February, 2010. Senior prom ticket, $85. November, 2012. Car insurance deductible after minor fender bender, $500. The total sum at the bottom of the last page was bolded, $342,891.14. I stared at the number. $300,000. That was the price tag they had put on me. That was the value of 30 years of dinners, school plays, doctor visits, and Christmas mornings. They had quantified my childhood down to the cent. It was almost funny. It was a dark, twisted cosmic joke. I wondered if they had included a line item for emotional damage, or if that was considered a free value add. I imagined my father sitting in his study, late at night, entering these receipts into Excel. I imagined him adjusting for inflation, feeling a sense of satisfaction as the number grew. "Look at how much she costs," he would think. "Look at how much we are losing." It reduced me to a commodity. I was not a daughter. I was a depreciating asset. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I jumped, my heart spiking. For a second, I thought it might be my mother. Maybe she had broken out of her trance. Maybe she was calling to say, "Come back. We made a mistake. We love you." It was a notification from my work email, a calendar reminder for a team sync at 9 in the morning. I laughed, a short, sharp sound that made a trucker at the counter turn and look at me. I was sitting in a roadside diner with a bill for my existence on the table, and my phone was reminding me to update the compliance log. I unlocked the phone and opened my email app. I needed to buy time. I could not go into Arbor Crest tomorrow. I could not sit in a glass-walled conference room and discuss risk mitigation strategies when my own personal risk assessment had just hit 100% catastrophic failure. I typed a new message to my boss. David, subject, personal emergency, leave of absence. David, I am writing to request an immediate personal leave for the next few days. Something unexpected has come up regarding a family medical matter. I paused. Medical matter sounded serious enough to avoid questions, but vague enough to be technically true. My family had just surgically removed me, which felt fairly medical. I will be offline until further notice. I have uploaded the final audit reports to the shared drive. Thank you for understanding. Lucy, I hit send. It felt anticlimactic. I had just paused my career. The one thing in my life that actually made sense, with 3 sentences typed on a greasy screen. Darlene arrived with the banana split and the onion rings. The combination looked revolting. The ice cream was already melting, sliding down the side of the banana in sugary rivulets. I took a forkful of whipped cream and put it in my mouth. It tasted like nothing. I pushed the dossier aside and pulled the gym bag onto the seat next to me. I needed to see what my mother considered essential. I unzipped the main compartment. The smell of my childhood bedroom wafted out, a mix of lavender detergent and old dust. I reached in and pulled out a stack of clothes. She had packed my sweatpants, 3 t-shirts from college, a pair of jeans I had left at their house 2 years ago that barely fit me anymore, a handful of underwear, my old running shoes. It was the inventory of a stranger. These were not the things I would have chosen. Where was my jewelry? Where were the journals I kept in the nightstand? Where was the silver locket my grandmother gave me? She had grabbed the things that meant nothing. She had packed the surface layer of my life and left the core behind to be liquidated. I dug deeper into the side pocket of the bag. My fingers brushed against something hard and cold. I pulled it out. It was a small, silver key. I frowned. It was a simple key, the kind you use for a diary or a small lockbox. It had a piece of masking tape wrapped around the head with a number written on it in blue ink. 4-2. I did not recognize it. I did not own a lockbox at my parents' house. I reached back into the pocket to see if there was anything else. My hand closed around a thin, white envelope. It was crumpled, as if it had been shoved in hastily, or perhaps it had been stuck to the lining of the bag for years and gotten caught up in the packing frenzy. There was no name on the outside of the envelope. I tore it open. Inside, there was a single sheet of notepad paper, yellowed at the edges. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was my mother's script, looping, precise, but slightly more hurried than her usual calm calligraphy. It was a list, but not like the spreadsheet. Alpha Fidelity Trust. Account number ending in 8940. Disbursement date, October 14th, 2025. Reference, L.H. Settlement. I stared at the paper, the date, October 14th, 2025. That was today. That was my birthday. But the paper was old, the ink was faded, and the paper had that soft, velvety texture that comes with age. This note had been written years ago. A chill that had nothing to do with the diner's air conditioning washed over me. Disbursement. That was a financial term. It meant a payout. A release of funds. L.H. Settlement. Lucy Hughes Settlement? I looked at the key again. 4-2. My mind, trained to spot inconsistencies and patterns in corporate data, began to race. The spreadsheet my father had shown me was a record of expenses. It was a justification for cutting me off. They claimed they were stopping the bleeding. They claimed they could not afford to support a stranger. But this note suggested something else entirely. If they had a note about a disbursement scheduled for my 30th birthday, and if that note was written years ago, then this was not a sudden decision based on a recent DNA confirmation. They had known. They had known for a long time, my father said. We confirmed it last week. He lied. They didn't just find out I wasn't their daughter. They had been sitting on this information, planning for this specific date. Why today? Why wait until I was exactly 30? I looked at the words Alpha Fidelity Trust. That sounded like an investment firm or a holding company, and settlement implied a legal agreement. The pieces started to click together in a terrifying configuration. They didn't kick me out because they were angry about the DNA. They kicked me out because of what happens when I turn 30. The spreadsheet was a distraction. It was a prop designed to make me feel guilty, to make me feel like a burden, so I would walk away without asking questions. They wanted me to feel like I owed them money, so I wouldn't realize that maybe, just maybe, there was money waiting for me. My mother must have scooped this envelope up by accident. She was probably frantically clearing out a drawer, grabbing anything that looked like it belonged to Lucy, and this old note, buried in the back, got swept into the gym bag. This was not a tragedy of biology. This was a heist. I looked out the window of the diner. The parking lot was dark, illuminated only by the harsh yellow glow of the street lamps. I felt a sudden surge of adrenaline, sharp and electric, cutting through the numbness of the shock. I was not just a victim of a cruel family drama. I was a loose end in a financial scheme. I picked up an onion ring and took a bite. It was cold and greasy, but suddenly, I had an appetite. I needed to find out what Alpha Fidelity Trust was, and I needed to find out what that key opened. My father thought he had closed the book on Lucy Hughes tonight. He thought he had balanced the ledger, but he had made a mistake. He had let me leave with the one piece of paper he should have shredded. I took a sip of the black coffee. It was bitter and burnt. It tasted like fuel. "Check, please," I called out to Darlene. I wasn't going to hide in a motel and cry. I had a puzzle to solve, and for the first time in 3 hours, I stopped feeling like a ghost. Ghosts don't have keys. The neon sign of the Silver Spoon buzzed with a low, electrical hum that sounded like a trapped insect. I pushed open the glass door and stepped out into the parking lot, the cold night air hitting my face and instantly drying the sheen of sweat that had formed on my forehead. I adjusted the strap of the gym bag on my shoulder, feeling the weight of the dossier pressing against my hip. I had a key I did not understand, a letter about a trust fund I did not know existed, and a stomach full of half-melted ice cream. I felt nauseous and wired at the same time. I walked toward my car, fishing my keys out of my pocket. I just wanted to drive until the gaslight came on. I wanted to find a motel room with blackout curtains and sleep for 3 days. "Ms. Hughes," the voice came from the shadows near the dumpster enclosure. It was not a threatening voice, but it was startlingly clear. I spun around, clutching my keys between my knuckles like a makeshift weapon, a trick I had learned in a self-defense class my father had paid for and subsequently billed me $200 for. A silver Volvo was parked in the corner of the lot, its engine idling silently. Standing beside it, illuminated by the harsh white beam of a security light, was Dr. Sloan Mercer. She was still wearing the gray suit, but she had removed her blazer, revealing a crisp white silk blouse. She looked less like a party guest now, and more like a detective arriving at a crime scene. "I am not here to give you a hug," she said, raising her hands slightly, palms open. "And I am not here to deliver a message from your parents. I just need 5 minutes of your time. Rational time, not emotional time." I hesitated. My instinct was to run. My flight response had been triggered 3 hours ago and it was still redlining. But there was something about her tone, clinical, detached, precise, that cut through my panic. She spoke my language. She spoke the language of compliance and analysis. "You are the geneticist," I said, my voice rasping. "The one who crashed the party." "I am a genetic counselor," she corrected, taking a step forward. She stopped 10 feet away, respecting the perimeter I had mentally drawn. And I did not crash. I was observing. There is a difference. "Observing what?" I asked. "My public execution?" "Your parents' performance," she said. She gestured toward the dossier tucked under my arm. "May I see that file again? The medical section. I didn't get a chance to finish my review before you exited." I tightened my grip on the plastic cover. "Why? Do you want to double-check the math?" Do you want to confirm that I am a 0% match? I want to confirm that the document is a forgery, she said. The world stopped spinning for a second. The wind seemed to die down. What? I whispered. I didn't say the result was wrong, Sloane said. Her eyes locked on mine. I said the document is a forgery. There is a nuance there. Lucy, a very important one, if you let me see it. I can explain. I looked at her. I looked at the empty parking lot. I had nothing left to lose. My reputation was gone. My home was gone. And my identity was in shambles. If she was lying, what else could she possibly take from me? I walked over to the hood of my car and slammed the dossier down. I flipped it open to the DNA section, the pages fluttering in the breeze. Sloane moved in next to me. She pulled a pen light from her pocket. Who carries a pen light to a birthday party? And clicked it on. A narrow beam of light swept over the colorful charts and the blocks of text. Look here, she said, pointing to the header. See this logo? Genomic Vistas. It is a real company. They do direct-to-consumer testing, ancestry, health traits, that sort of thing. But look at the marker panel listed below. I squinted. It just looked like a list of alphanumeric codes to me. It looks like science, I said. It is science, Sloane replied, but it is the wrong kind. These markers, D3S1358, VWA, these are standard CODIS markers used for forensic identification. Law enforcement uses them. Paternity suits use them. But Genomic Vistas doesn't run this panel. They run S&P arrays. It is like ordering a hamburger and getting a taco. They are both food, but they come from different kitchens. She moved the light down to the footer of the page. And here, she continued, see the accreditation stamp? It is pixelated, just slightly. If you look at the text next to it, the font is crisp. The stamp is an image that was copy-pasted from another source. It was resized. Whoever made this document took a header from a consumer lab, pasted in forensic data they found somewhere else, and slapped a stamp on the bottom to make it look official. This isn't a medical record. Lucy, it is a collage. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. You are saying they made it up? I am saying this piece of paper is a prop, Sloane said, clicking the light off. It was designed to look convincing to a room full of laypeople, to your uncle, to your neighbors. This looks irrefutable. It has colors. It has big words. It has a 0% in bold. But in a court of law, or in a clinical setting, it is garbage. But why? I asked, my voice rising. Why go to all that trouble? If they wanted to prove I am not their daughter, why not just get a real test? Sloane leaned back against the car, crossing her arms. That is the question, isn't it? Usually, people forge results when the real results don't tell the story they want. Or, she paused, her expression darkening. Or when they don't want a paper trail leading back to a real lab. I don't understand, I said. You said you were observing. You said you came with a cousin. Why do you care? Why did you follow me here? Sloane sighed. She looked tired suddenly. The professional mask slipped just a fraction, revealing a human being underneath. I used to work in hospital administration, she said. A long time ago, before I went into private practice, I worked in the records department of a large university hospital system, the same system where you were born. If my memory of your father's boasting is correct. She looked out at the highway, watching the headlights streak by. We had a saying in the basement, she said softly. The ink is dry, but the paper is wet. It meant that sometimes records were changed before they were filed. It didn't happen often, but when it did, it was usually because someone powerful made a phone call. I saw files disappear. I saw birth logs get retyped. I was 22. I needed the job, so I kept my mouth shut. She turned back to me. When your father put that file on the table, it triggered something in me. It wasn't just the bad formatting, it was the arrogance. It was the absolute certainty that no one would check his work. I have seen that look before. It is the look of a man who believes he can rewrite reality because he can afford the ink. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a business card. She held it out to me. I don't know if you are their biological daughter or not. Sloane said, but I know that document is a lie. And if they are lying about the test, they are lying about other things. They wanted you to leave tonight, Lucy. They wanted you to run away in shame so you wouldn't ask questions. I took the card. It was heavy. Textured cardstock. Doctor, Sloane Mercer. Genetic counseling, forensic consulting. What do I do? I asked. You get a real test, she said. An independent one. I can help you arrange it. But more importantly, she leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Do not sign anything. If they contact you, if they send lawyers, if they offer you a settlement in exchange for a signature, do not sign. They didn't stage a show like that just to hurt your feelings. They did it to create a narrative of estrangement. They are building a case. A case for what? I don't know yet, Sloane admitted. But wealthy people don't use fake DNA tests to save money on grocery bills. There is an asset in play, a big one. I thought of the envelope in the gym bag, the Alpha Fidelity Trust, the key. Sloane was right. She was terrifyingly right. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me yet, Sloane said. This is going to get ugly. Your parents are not going to like that you didn't disappear. She turned to go back to her Volvo, but then she stopped. She looked past me, toward the dark corner of the parking lot where the shadows were deepest. Her posture stiffened. We have company, she said. I turned around. A figure was emerging from the darkness, walking toward us with a slow, hesitant gait. It was a woman. She was wearing a dark trench coat, belted tightly at the waist, and her hands were shoved deep into her pockets as she stepped into the pool of light from the street lamp. My breath caught in my throat. She was about my age, maybe a year younger, maybe a year older, but it wasn't her age that made my heart stop. It was her face. She had my mother's nose, that delicate, slightly upturned slope that I had always envied because mine was straighter, broader. She had my father's jawline, sharp, defined, stubborn, and her hair, it was the same pale, ash-blonde color that my mother paid hundreds of dollars a month to maintain. But on this woman, it looked natural. She looked like the photograph my parents kept on the mantel. Not a photograph of me, but the photograph of the family they thought they deserved. She looked more like a Hughes than I did. I felt a wave of dizziness. It was like looking into a mirror that was reflecting a parallel universe. The woman stopped a few feet away from us. She looked at Sloane, then she looked at me. Her eyes were wide, rimmed with red, as if she had been crying. But her expression wasn't one of hostility. It was one of profound, terrified recognition. I didn't mean to startle you, she said. Her voice was soft, tremulous. I followed you from the house. I didn't know how to approach you. Who are you? I asked, though deep down, in the pit of my stomach where the ice cream was turning into acid, I already knew. My name is Harper Lane, she said. She took a hand out of her pocket. She was trembling. I was at the party, Harper said. I got an invitation in the mail 3 days ago. No return address, just a card with the date, the time, and a note that said, "Come and see where you belong." She looked at the dossier on the hood of my car. I arrived late, she continued. The door was unlocked. I heard people in the kitchen. I stood in the hallway, behind the coats. I saw everything. I saw what they did to you. She looked up at me, and the resemblance was so painful it physically hurt. It was like seeing the ghost of the daughter my parents had always wanted. I am sorry, Harper whispered. I think I am the reason they did it. I think I am the one who was supposed to leave the hospital with them. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Doctor. Sloane Mercer stood quietly to the side, watching us with analytical intensity. I looked at Harper, this stranger who wore my mother's face, and I waited for the anger to come. I waited to feel the jealousy, The rage at this person who had apparently walked out of the shadows to claim the life I had just lost. But the anger didn't come, because looking at her, I saw something else. I saw the cheap coat. I saw the scuffed boots. I saw the fear in her eyes. She wasn't a conqueror. She was just as confused, just as manipulated, and just as terrified as I was. "They invited you?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Yes," Harper said, "but they didn't talk to me. They didn't even know I was there. They sent the invite and let me watch." "They wanted an audience," Sloane interjected, her voice sharp. "But more than that, they wanted a replacement on standby. They wanted you to see the vacancy." Harper shook her head. "I don't want the vacancy. I saw how they treated you. Who treats a human being like a tax write-off?" She reached into her pocket again and pulled out a piece of paper. It was a crumpled invitation, printed on expensive cardstock. "I don't want their money," Harper said, her voice gaining a little strength. "And I certainly don't want their last name if that is what it costs. But I need to know the truth. I grew up in foster care. Lucy, I never knew who my parents were. And tonight, I looked at your father, and I saw my own eyes staring back at me." She looked at me, pleading. "I am not your enemy," she said. "I think we are both victims of the same lie." I looked at Harper, then I looked at Sloane, and then I looked down at the key in my hand, the key to a future my parents had tried to hide. "You are not the replacement," I said to Harper, a sudden clarity washing over me. "And I am not the mistake. We are the evidence." I unlocked my car. "Get in," I said to both of them. "We can't talk here. And I have a feeling that whatever game my father is playing, he just dealt himself a losing hand by putting the three of us in the same parking lot." Sloane smiled, a small, sharp expression of approval. "I will follow you," she said. "I know a place where we can review the strategy. And Lucy, you might want to finish that banana split. You are going to need the sugar." Harper looked at me, unsure. "Where are we going?" "To find out what happens when you cross-reference a fake DNA test with a real human being," I said. "And to find out what this key opens." The wind picked up, swirling leaves around our feet. The night was dark, but for the first time since I walked into that kitchen, I didn't feel blind. I had a team, I had a clue, and I had a burning, white-hot need to make sure that the spreadsheet my father was so proud of was about to get very, very complicated. The morning sun did not bring clarity. It brought the harsh, unforgiving light of a procedural investigation. We were no longer in the emotional haze of a birthday party gone wrong. We were in Dr. Sloane Mercer's office, a space that smelled of antiseptic and lemon polish, treating my mouth like a crime scene. Sloane was rigorous. She wore latex gloves and used a kit that looked far more serious than the consumer boxes you buy at a drugstore. She swabbed the inside of my cheek for a full 20 seconds, sealed the sample in a biohazard bag, and then made me sign a chain of custody form. "This is how we win," Sloane said, peeling off her gloves with a snap. "Your father's theatrical presentation in the kitchen was hearsay. This is evidence. We are sending this to a forensic lab in the city. Rush processing. We will have the biological truth in 48 hours. I sat on the exam table, feeling exposed. And what if the biology confirms what he said? What if I am not their daughter? "Biology is just one layer of the truth," Sloane replied, sitting down at her desk and opening a laptop. "The law is the other, in the eyes of the state. You don't cease to be a daughter just because of a blood test. You cease to be a daughter when the paperwork says so. That is why we need to see the original records." Harper was sitting in the corner chair, looking small and exhausted. She had not slept. None of us had. She was holding a battered shoebox on her lap, the sum total of her personal history. "I have something," Harper said quietly. She opened the box and pulled out a faded, dog-eared photograph. "My foster mom gave me this when I turned 18. She said it was in the bag I came with from the hospital." I walked over and looked at the photo. It was a Polaroid of a newborn baby, red-faced and squalling, Wrapped in a generic hospital blanket, the baby's wrist was encircled by a plastic identification band. "Look at the number." Harper pointed. I squinted. The image was grainy, but the black digits on the white plastic were legible. 0, 8, 9. "So?" I asked. "My birth certificate says I was born at 2:14 in the morning," Harper said. I looked up the hospital logs for that date. It is public record for statistical purposes. There were only 2 births that night within an hour of each other, me and the Hughes baby. She looked up at me. If I was 089, the other baby would have been 088 or 090. Hospitals issue them sequentially. Sloane spun her chair around. "Lucy, do you have your birth records?" "I have my birth certificate," I said. "It is in my safety deposit box at the bank, but I have a digital copy on my phone. I needed it for my passport renewal last year." I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling slightly as I navigated to my secure document folder. I found the PDF and zoomed in. Name: Lucille Marie Hughes. Date of birth: October 14th, 1995. File number: 1004. "That is the file number," Sloane said, standing up and looking over my shoulder. "I need the bracelet number. It is usually listed in the nursing notes or the intake log." I scrolled down. I had scanned the entire packet my parents had given me when I turned 18. There, on a scanned page of the certificate of live birth, was a small box for ID band number. It was typed in 089. The room went silent. "That is impossible," Harper whispered. "We can't both be 089. That means someone duplicated the entry," Sloane finished. "Or someone physically took the bracelet off one baby and put it on the record of the other." "We need to go to the hospital," I said, a cold resolve settling in my stomach. Not to the records department, to the people. Finding someone who worked in the maternity ward 30 years ago was less of a challenge than I expected. Thanks to the internet and Sloane's access to medical alumni networks, we found a name: Mrs. Loretta Gable. She had been the head charge nurse on the night shift for 20 years. She was retired now, living in a small bungalow about 20 minutes from the city center. We drove there in my car. Harper sat in the back, silent, clutching her shoebox. I drove with a mechanical precision, my mind racing through the implications of 2 babies wearing the same number. Mrs. Gable was a woman made of iron and floral print. She invited us in not because she was friendly, but because when Sloane mentioned the name Hughes, her face had gone pale, and she had immediately unlocked the screen door. We sat in her living room, which smelled of potpourri and old secrets. "I knew this day would come," Mrs. Gable said. She poured tea into china cups with a trembling hand. "I told them back then. I said, 'Paper has a long memory.'" "Tell us what happened," I said. "Please, my life depends on it." Mrs. Gable looked at me, her eyes watery and sad. "You were the quiet one," she said softly. "The other baby, the one that poor girl brought in, she screamed her lungs out. But you just watched." "What happened with the bracelets?" Sloane asked, her voice gentle but firm. "We know there was a duplicate number." "It wasn't a duplicate," Mrs. Gable corrected. "It was a swap. Mr. Hughes, your father. He was a very intimidating man even back then. He came into the nursery at 3 in the morning. He was arguing with the doctor. I didn't hear everything, but I heard him say, 'I will not raise a sickly child. Fix it.'" I felt the blood drain from my face. "Sickly?" "Harper had jaundice," Mrs. Gable said, looking at Harper. "And a murmur. It turned out to be nothing serious. Obviously, you grew up strong, but that night, you looked fragile. And the Hughes family, they didn't do fragile." She took a sip of tea. "The doctor ordered me to switch the bands. He said it was an administrative correction. He said the logs were wrong. I knew he was lying. I knew he was afraid of Mr. Hughes and his lawyers. So I did what I was told. I switched the bands. But I made a note." "A note?" I asked. "In the master log," she said. "The physical book, not the computer system they installed later. I wrote entry amended per doctor, Vance verbal order. I didn't write what the amendment was. I was too scared. But if you look at the physical archives, you will see the whiteout. You will see where 089 was written over 090. I looked at Harper. She was crying silently. My father had traded her away like a defective product because she had a heart murmur. He had stolen me, a healthy stranger, because I fit the specifications of the daughter he wanted. It wasn't a mistake. It was a transaction. We left Mrs. Gable's house in a stunned silence. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the street. "So I am the stolen one," I said, gripping the steering wheel. "And Harper is the discarded one, and my parents are kidnappers." "Technically," Sloane said, looking out the window, "it is custodial fraud, but yes, kidnapping is the moral equivalent." "But why now?" Harper asked from the back seat. "If they got away with it for 30 years, why blow it up now? Why humiliate you? Why not just keep the secret?" "That is the question," I said, "and I think the answer is in my bag." We pulled into the parking lot of a public library. It was the only place I could think of that was quiet, neutral, and had Wi-Fi. We found a table in the back corner. I pulled the gym bag onto the table and took out the envelope, the one with the key and the note about the Alpha Fidelity Trust. "Sloane," I said, "you know about compliance. You know about money. What is a disbursement at 30? Sloane took the note. She adjusted her glasses, her eyes scanning the faded ink. "It is a trust fund term," she said. "Wealthy families often set up trusts that release funds at specific milestones to prevent their children from blowing the money when they are too young. 21, 25, 30. 30 is a common age for a full payout or a transfer of control." She pulled out her phone and started typing. "Alpha Fidelity," she muttered. "Okay, here it is. They are a boutique wealth management firm, very exclusive. They specialize in generational wealth transfer." She looked up at me. "Lucy, who set up this trust? Your parents?" "I don't know," I said. "I didn't know it existed until last night." "If your parents set it up," Sloane reasoned, "they could revoke it. They wouldn't need to stage a DNA drama to stop you from getting the money. They are the grantors. They control the terms. Unless," Harper said, leaning forward, "they aren't the grantors." I looked at the key. 4, 2. "My grandmother," I said suddenly. The memory hit me like a physical blow. "My father's mother. She died when I was 5. She was the only one who ever really hugged me. She was rich, old money rich. Dad always said she was eccentric." "If your grandmother set up an irrevocable trust for her granddaughter," Sloane said, her voice rising with excitement, "listing the beneficiary as the daughter of Robert and Elaine Hughes, then your father cannot touch that money. He cannot cancel it. He cannot drain it." "But he can prove I am not the daughter." I realized. "Exactly," Sloane said. She slammed her hand on the table, startling a nearby student. "That is the play. If the trust pays out to you automatically on your 30th birthday, the money is yours. Unless he proves fraud," I said. "Unless he proves I am not the beneficiary named in the trust." "He needs you to be a stranger," Harper said, her eyes widening. "If you are a stranger, the money doesn't go to you." "And if the money doesn't go to me," I said, "where does it go?" Sloane tapped the screen of her phone. "I am looking at the standard clauses for these types of trusts. If the primary beneficiary is disqualified or deceased, the funds usually revert to the estate of the grantor or into the control of the legal guardians for redistribution." "He wants the money," I said. The realization was so cold it burned. "He doesn't care about the bloodline. He doesn't care about the truth. He has been waiting 30 years for this trust to mature, and now that it is here, he needs to disqualify me so he can claim it himself." "But he can't just show a fake DNA test to a bank," Sloane argued. "Banks have their own investigators. Alpha Fidelity would sniff out that forgery in 10 seconds. That is why he needs my signature, I said. I remembered the way he looked at me in the kitchen, the way he pointed to the bag, the way he mentioned the costs. We are not unreasonable. We are not throwing you out on the street. He is going to offer me a deal, I said. He is going to contact me. He is going to say, Lucy, we know this is hard. Here is a settlement check for $50,000. Just sign this document acknowledging that you are not our biological child and that you waive all claims to the family estate. And the moment you sign that waiver, Sloan said, you legally disqualify yourself from the trust. You hand him the keys to the vault. He tries to buy me off with $50,000 to steal. I looked at the note again. There was no amount listed. How much do you think is in there? If it was set up 30 years ago with old money compound interest? Sloan whistled low. Millions. We are talking about millions of dollars. Lucy? My phone buzzed on the table. It was an email. I looked at the screen. The sender was Robert Hughes. Subject: Separation agreement. Urgent. I didn't open it. I didn't have to. I knew exactly what was inside. It was the trap. He sent it, I said. The agreement. I looked at Harper. She was the rightful heir by blood. I was the rightful heir by paper, and my father was trying to cheat us both. He thinks I am alone, I said. He thinks I am crying in a motel room, desperate for cash. I picked up the key. It felt heavy in my hand. It was no longer just a piece of metal. It was a weapon. He wants a signature, I said to the two women who had become my lifeline. I say we give him a meeting instead, but we aren't going to sign his papers. We are going to rewrite them. How? Harper asked. We need to get into that safety deposit box, I said. The key says 42. That is a bank box number. If my mother had this key, and the note about the trust that means the original trust documents are in that box, not the fake ones he might try to show the bank, the real ones. And if we find those documents, Sloan asked, then we prove that he knew. I said, we prove that he knew about the switch. We prove he knew I wasn't his daughter, and he raised me anyway, not out of love, but because he was waiting for the payout. That is fraud. That is criminal fraud. I stood up. The fear was gone. The confusion was gone. All that was left was the cold, hard precision of a compliance officer who had just found a major violation in the system. I am going to Arbor Crest in the morning, I said. Not to work, to use the corporate scanner. We are going to build a dossier of our own, and then we are going to have a birthday party. The following afternoon, I met Harper in the only place that felt neutral enough for two versions of the same life to collide. A concrete bench overlooking the reservoir in the city park. It was a gray, blustery day, the kind where the wind whips your hair across your face and makes conversation difficult, which was exactly why I chose it. I did not want to be overheard. I did not want to be comfortable. I watched her walk toward me from the parking lot. It was a surreal, out-of-body experience, like watching a deepfake video of myself generated by an algorithm that had been fed slightly different data parameters. She walked with a heavier stride than I did, her shoulders hunched against the wind, hands buried deep in the pockets of a denim jacket that had seen better days. But the architecture of her face, the high forehead, the set of the jaw, was undeniably Hughes. She was the rough draft of the masterpiece my parents thought they were painting. Or perhaps I was the forgery, and she was the original that had been left out in the rain. She sat down on the other end of the bench, leaving a careful 2 feet of distance between us. We sat in silence for a long time, watching the choppy water of the reservoir. You look like her, Harper said finally, not looking at me. Your mother, in the sunlight, you look exactly like her. She is not my mother, I corrected, though the words still tasted like ash in my mouth. She is just the woman who managed my portfolio for 30 years. Harper let out a short, dry laugh. Must be nice, having a portfolio. I turned to look at her. This was the friction point. This was the moment where the narrative expected us to clash. The princess and the pauper, The stolen child who lived in luxury and the discarded child who scraped by all laws of dramatic logic. She should hate me. She should be looking at my coat, which probably cost more than her car, with venom in her eyes, and I should be looking at her with fear, terrified that she was here to repossess my existence. It wasn't what you think, I said quietly. The house, the cars, the private schools, it looks like a lot from the outside. But inside? It was a museum. You don't touch the displays. You don't make noise. You just exist to be dusted and admired. Harper picked at a loose thread on her jeans. I grew up in 4 different foster homes before I was 12, she said. Her voice was matter-of-fact, devoid of self-pity. Then the Lanes adopted me. They run a hardware store in a town you have probably never heard of. We didn't have money. I wore hand-me-downs until I got my first job at 16. My college fund was a jar on the refrigerator. She paused, kicking at a pebble with her boot. But when I broke my leg playing soccer in the 10th grade, she continued, my dad, my adoptive dad, slept in a chair next to my bed for 3 nights because I was scared of the pain meds. And when I failed my driving test, my mom didn't yell. She took me out for ice cream and told me we would try again next week. I felt a physical pang in my chest, sharp and hollow. It was not pity for her. It was a scorching, blinding jealousy. I had spent the last 24 hours thinking about the money, the trust fund, the 6-figure bill my father had presented. I thought that was the theft. But listening to Harper, I realized the money was just the cover charge. The real theft was the dad sleeping in the chair. The real theft was the ice cream after a failure. My father billed me for my broken arm. Her father gave her his time. You won, I said, my voice trembling. You don't realize it, Harper, but you won. You got parents. I got investors. Harper looked at me then, and the hardness in her eyes softened. She saw it. She saw the gaping hole in me where the foundation should have been. I didn't come here to take your place, Lucy, she said. I know that is what you're afraid of. You think I want to slide into your apartment, take your job, sit at their dinner table. She shook her head. I met them. I saw them for 5 minutes, and that was enough. They are cold. They are like reptiles in human suits. Then why did you come? I asked. Why go to the party? Harper reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. The screen was cracked in the corner. Because they didn't just invite me, she said. They courted me. She unlocked the phone and opened her email app. She handed it to me. Read the thread. Start from the bottom. I took the phone. The first email was dated 2 months ago. The sender was Robert Hughes. Dear Ms. Lane, I am writing to you regarding a sensitive family matter. Through extensive private investigation, we have reason to believe that a significant error occurred at Mercy General Hospital 30 years ago. We believe you are our biological daughter. It started politely enough, but as I scrolled up, the tone shifted. It became strategic. Grooming. October 2nd. We are not looking to disrupt your life, Harper, but we are looking to correct an injustice. The person currently occupying your position has failed to live up to the family standard. We believe that nature ultimately triumphs over nurture. We want to offer you what is rightfully yours. October 10th. We need you to be present on the 14th. It is crucial. We are planning a disclosure. Your presence will serve as the undeniable proof of our claim. When people see you, when they see the resemblance, the other narrative will collapse. We need a witness. Harper, we need a living mirror to show everyone the mistake we have been forced to endure. I lowered the phone. My hands were shaking. The person occupying your position, I repeated. Occupying, like I am a squatter, like I am an unauthorized tenant. Keep reading, Harper said. The last one. Sent the morning of the party. I scrolled to the top. Harper, do not approach us initially. Stay in the crowd. Let the shock settle. We need her to be completely isolated before we introduce you. If you speak to her, you weaken the impact. We need her broken, not comforted. Once she is removed, We can discuss the terms of your integration into the estate. Integration into the estate, I whispered. He talks about us like we are software updates. I handed the phone back to her. I felt sick. He didn't want you, I said, looking at the water. He wanted a prop. He needed you there to validate his cruelty. If he just kicked me out, he would look like a monster. But if he kicks me out and immediately points to you, the poor, long-lost biological daughter, he looks like a victim. He looks like a father trying to restore order. Exactly, Harper said. I was never supposed to be the daughter. I was supposed to be the gavel. I was the object he was going to use to smash you. She put the phone away. When I got those emails, I was curious. I admit it. I wanted to know where I came from. But standing in that kitchen, watching him hand you that bill, I realized something. He wasn't trying to find his child. He was trying to win a case. He was writing a story where he is the hero who survived a tragedy, and you are the villain who wasted his resources. And you, I added, are the prize at the end of the movie, the happy ending that proves he was right all along. Harper turned on the bench so she was facing me fully. I don't want to be a prize, Lucy, and I definitely don't want to be integrated into an estate that treats people like line items. I have a family. They aren't rich, but they don't audit me. She took a deep breath. I almost left, she confessed. When you ran out, I almost just got in my car and drove back to my real life. But then I saw your face. I saw the way you looked when you realized they had packed your bag. And I realized that if I leave, he wins. If I leave, he gets to tell the story however he wants. He gets to say you were a fraud, and I was the miracle. He wants a winner, I said, remembering the text. We want a person who wins. So let's not give him one, Harper said. Her voice was fierce now. Or at least, not the one he expects. I looked at this woman who shared my DNA markers, but none of my history. I looked at the hands that were shaped like mine, but had calluses from work I had never done. For 30 years, I had been terrified of not being enough. I had performed. I had complied. I had twisted myself into knots to fit the mold of the perfect Hughes daughter, and all along, the only thing that would have satisfied them was a different genetic code. But now, sitting here with the person who possessed that magic code, I realized she was just as disgusted by them as I was. You know, I said slowly, my job is risk management, compliance. I look for the hidden liabilities in a contract, the things that can bring a company down from the inside. And? Harper asked. And my father just created a massive liability, I said. He assumed that because we are sisters, in whatever twisted way, we would be natural enemies. He assumed I would hate you for being the real one, and you would hate me for having the money. He banked on us destroying each other so he could step over the wreckage and claim the trust fund. Divide and conquer. Harper nodded. But he forgot the first rule of crisis management, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. Never put all your victims in the same room, because eventually, they start comparing notes. I reached into my bag and pulled out the gym bag key, the key to the safety deposit box. I am not going to fight you for a place in that house, Harper, I said. You can have the family crest. You can have the country club membership. I don't want any of it anymore. I don't want it either, Harper said firmly. Then let's take the one thing they actually care about, I said. Let's take the money, not because we are greedy, but because it is the only language they speak. If we take the trust fund, the one my grandmother set up for her granddaughter, we cut off their supply. We don't just leave, we bankrupt the firm. Harper looked at the key, then back at me. A slow grin spread across her face. It was my father's grin, sharp and predatory, but on her, it looked righteous. I have a friend who works at a print shop, Harper said. If we need to make some copies or scan some documents, or maybe print a few things to bring to a meeting, we are going to need more than a print shop, I said. We are going to need a strategy. We are going to need to walk into that bank tomorrow not as rivals, but as a joint front, the biological heir and the legal heir. I held out my hand. Partners? I asked. Harper looked at my hand, then she reached out and gripped it. Her palm was rough, warm, and solid. Partners, she said. Let's go burn down the spreadsheet. As we stood up from the bench, the wind died down. The gray water of the reservoir settled into a flat, mirror-like surface. I looked at our reflections in the water. We didn't look like versions of each other anymore. We looked like a team. My father wanted a drama. He wanted a catfight. He wanted a tragedy where he could play the long-suffering patriarch. Instead, he was about to get a hostile takeover. We set up our command center in Dr. Mercer's home office. It was a stark contrast to my parents' house, where their home was filled with decorative clutter designed to signal wealth. Sloane's space was functional, minimalist, and lined with books on medical ethics and forensic law. Harper was sitting on the floor with a laptop Sloane had lent her, while I took the main desk. I was no longer the heartbroken daughter. I was the senior compliance officer at Arbor Crest, and I was conducting an audit on the two people who had manufactured my life. I started with the basics. In my line of work, we have a saying: follow the stress. People do not commit fraud when they are comfortable. They commit fraud when the walls are closing in. My father had always projected an image of invincible financial health. He drove new cars. He wore Italian suits. He vacationed in the vineyard regions of France. But as I logged into the public property tax records and cross-referenced them with the credit bureau data I had access to through my professional clearance, the image began to crack. The first red flag was the house. They had taken out a second mortgage 3 years ago. That in itself was not a crime, but the amount was staggering. $450,000 against a home that was already leveraged. Then I saw the credit card utilization. My mother, the woman who lectured me on the virtue of frugality, had 3 cards maxed out. We were talking about $60,000 in revolving debt at 18% interest. They are bleeding, I muttered, staring at the screen. They are living on fumes. What do you mean? Harper asked, looking up from her laptop. They are broke, I said, turning the screen so she could see. Asset rich, cash poor. They have the big house and the cars, but they don't have liquidity. They are shuffling debt from one pile to another. That explains the mood swings, Harper said dryly, and the cheap wine at the party. But debt alone does not explain a fake DNA test and a public disowning. People go bankrupt every day. They do not usually stage elaborate plays to erase their children. There had to be a trigger. I dug deeper. I pulled up the business filings for my father's consulting firm. It was a small LLC he used for his contract work. On paper, it looked dormant. But when I looked at the loan history associated with the company, my blood ran cold. There was a secured business loan taken out 5 years ago. The principal was $200,000. The collateral listed was not the house. It was a portfolio of stocks. I frowned. My father didn't trade stocks. He was a bondsman, conservative, boring. I clicked on the details of the loan guarantor, Lucille M. Hughes. I stopped breathing. The room went silent, save for the hum of the hard drive. Lucy? Sloane asked, stepping away from the bookshelf. What did you find? I found a ghost, I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and vindication. There is a loan here. $200,000. Taken out in 2021. It lists me as the guarantor. It says I pledged my personal investment account as collateral. Did you? Sloane asked. No, I said. I didn't even have an investment account in 2021. I was still paying off my student loans. I had maybe $5,000 to my name. Identity theft, Sloane stated. It wasn't a question. Familial identity theft, I corrected. He used my name, my social security number, and my credit profile to secure a loan for his failing business. He probably forged my signature. He knew I wouldn't check. Why would I check the credit of a company I didn't own? I leaned back in the chair, the pieces of the puzzle slamming together with terrified velocity. This is why, I said. This is why they need me gone. If I ever found out about this loan, I could send him to prison. But if I am disowned, If I am painted as a fraud and a stranger, then any claim I make against him looks like retaliation. He destroys my credibility to protect his crime. It is worse than that, Sloane said. She walked over to the whiteboard where she had written the timeline. The loan is bad. Yes, but look at the date on the note from the gym bag. The Alpha Fidelity Trust. Disbursement date, October 14th, 2025. That is yesterday. She drew a circle around the date. The loan is $200,000, Sloane said. But a generational trust fund set up 30 years ago? That could be $2 million, maybe $5 million. So he needs the trust money to pay off the debts, Harper realized. He is drowning, and your grandmother's money is the life raft. But here is the catch, I said, my compliance brain firing on all cylinders. The trust is in my name, Lucille Marie Hughes. If the bank releases the funds, they release them to me, not to him. I am the adult beneficiary. Unless you are not Lucille Marie Hughes, Sloane said. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. If he proves to the bank that I am an imposter, I said slowly. If he shows them that DNA test and says, oops, we made a mistake, this woman is a stranger we accidentally raised, then the bank cannot release the money to me. I would be disqualified. And if the primary beneficiary is disqualified due to fraud or error, Sloane recited from her knowledge of estate law, the funds often revert to the grantor's estate, or, if the grantor is dead, to the next of kin of the intended beneficiary. Harper, I said, looking at her, he needs the money to revert to the family line, to the real Hughes bloodline. Harper looked horrified. So he wasn't inviting me in to be his daughter. He was inviting me in to be the vessel. He needs you to be the biological heir, I explained, but he needs to control you. That is why he wanted you isolated. That is why he wanted to integrate you slowly. He would have made you sign a power of attorney. He would have said, honey, this is all very complicated legal stuff. Let Daddy handle the accounts. And then he would have drained the trust to pay off his debts before you even knew the money existed. And the spreadsheet? Harper asked. The list of expenses? I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. That was the insurance policy. That was the leverage. If I refused to sign the waiver, if I refused to accept the narrative that I was a stranger, he would sue me. He would use that spreadsheet to say, okay, if you want to stay in this family, you owe us $300,000 in back rent and expenses. He wanted to bury me in debt so deep that I would sign anything just to get out. It is a moral debt trap, Sloane agreed. He creates a deficit. You owe us for raising you, to force you to surrender the asset, the trust fund. It is brilliant, I admitted. In a sick, sociopathic way, he covers his identity theft, he steals the trust fund, he clears his debts, and he swaps out a daughter who might ask questions for a new daughter he thinks he can manipulate. He didn't count on one thing, Harper said. She tapped a key on her laptop. He didn't count on me being paranoid. She turned her laptop around. On the screen was a screenshot of a digital calendar. How did you get this? I asked. I may have guessed his password. Harper shrugged. It was Hughes 1995. He isn't very creative. This is his Google Calendar. Look at tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. I leaned in. There, in bright blue block letters, was an appointment. Meeting with Alpha Fidelity, account transfer beneficiary adjustment. He is going to the bank tomorrow, I said. He is going to present the fake DNA test. He is going to tell them I am a fraud, and he is going to try to seize control of the trust. He is moving fast, Sloane said. He knows the disbursement date has passed. He is technically late. He needs to stop the automatic transfer before the bank processes it. I looked at the clock. It was 2 a.m. My birthday was officially over. The timeline had shifted from years to hours. He thinks I'm gone, I said. He thinks I am cowering in a motel room, staring at that spreadsheet, feeling guilty for existing. He thinks he has cleared the board. I stood up and walked to the window. The city lights were blinking in the distance, indifferent to my crisis. But I didn't feel indifferent anymore. I felt cold. I felt precise. For 30 years, I had tried to earn my parents' love. I had thought the distance between us was my fault. I thought if I was just smarter, quieter, more successful, I could close the gap. But the gap wasn't emotional. It was a line item in a ledger. I wasn't a child to them. I was a holding company. And they had just tried to liquidate me. "Sloan," I said, turning back to the room, "you said that for the bank to believe the DNA test, they would need a chain of custody, right? They would need to know it wasn't a prop?" "Correct," Sloan said. "A bank like Alpha Fidelity has a compliance department that makes yours look like a lemonade stand. They will want verification. And if he presents a forgery to a federally insured financial institution to gain access to funds?" I asked. Sloan smiled, and it was a terrifying thing to behold. "That is bank fraud. That is a federal crime. 10 to 30 years in prison." "Then we let him do it," I said. Harper looked at me, confused. "What?" "We don't stop him from going to the meeting," I said. "We let him walk in. We let him sit down. We let him hand over the fake DNA test. We let him make the claim. We let him commit the crime," Sloan finished, catching on. "Exactly," and I said. "If we stop him now, it is just a family dispute. He can claim it was a misunderstanding. He can claim emotional distress, but if he hands that forged document to the banker, he crosses the line. He seals his own fate. And then?" Harper asked. "And then we walk in," I said. "The biological daughter, the legal daughter, and the expert witness. We bring the real DNA test. We bring the birth records, and we bring the key." I picked up the gym bag key from the desk. "He wants to close the account on Lucy Hughes," I said. "I say we help him, but we are going to make sure he is the one who ends up with a zero balance." The plan was dangerous. It required timing, nerve, and a level of deception I had never practiced before. But I wasn't practicing anymore. I was executing. My father had taught me everything I knew about business. He taught me to be ruthless. He taught me to value the bottom line. Tomorrow, I was going to show him just how much I had learned. We convened at the office of Marcus Thorne, a civil litigation attorney Sloan had recommended. Thorne was a man who looked like he was carved out of mahogany and skepticism. His office was not in a glass tower, but in a renovated brownstone, the kind of place that smelled of old paper and serious hourly rates. He listened to our story without blinking, his pen scratching across a legal pad with a sound that reminded me of a metronome. "We are not going to sue them for emotional distress," Thorne said, leaning back in his leather chair. "Emotions are messy. Juries get confused by tears. We are going to sue them for conversion, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. We are going to make this about math." I liked him immediately. "I don't want to go to court if I don't have to," I said. "I want to end this tomorrow. My father has a meeting with Alpha Fidelity at 9 o'clock. He plans to claim the trust fund by declaring me a fraud. I want to stop him before he signs the paperwork." Thorne nodded. "Then we need to set a trap. Not a physical one, but a procedural one. We need to get him to admit, on the record, that he knows exactly who you are and, more importantly, why he kept you." Sloan placed a manila envelope on Thorne's desk. "This is the independent DNA analysis from the lab in the city. It arrived an hour ago." Thorne opened it. "And?" "It confirms that Lucy is not biologically related to Robert or Elaine Hughes," Sloan said. "However, it also confirms that the document Robert presented at the party was a fabrication. The markers on his report don't match standard human allelic frequencies. He literally copy-pasted random numbers. If he presents that fake report to a bank, he is committing a felony." "Good," Thorne said. "But we need more than bad science. We need proof of intent. We need to prove that this wasn't a recent discovery, as he claims. We need to prove he has been sitting on this secret for years." Waiting for the money to vest. I reached into my bag and pulled out the key. The silver key with the masking tape label. 4-2. "I think the proof is in the safety deposit box," I said. My mother packed this key by mistake. It opens a box at the First National Bank downtown. I remember going there with her when I was a teenager. She told me it was for family heirlooms. She never let me see inside. Technically, Thorne said, if the box is in her name, you can't open it. It is not in her name, I said. I checked the key code against the bank's registry online. It is a joint box, Robert Hughes and Lucille Hughes. They put my name on it when I turned 18 so I could access my birth certificate in an emergency. I just never used it. Thorne smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous expression. Then legally, Ms. Hughes, you are just retrieving your own property. Walking into the bank felt like walking into a cathedral of silence. The air was cool and smelled of money, that specific scent of crisp paper and ozone. I showed my ID and the key to the vault manager. He didn't blink. He led me into the secure room, pulled the long metal box from the wall, and left me alone in a private viewing booth. My hands were shaking as I set the box on the table. This was it, the black box of my life. I inserted the key and turned it. The lock clicked open with a smooth, satisfying sound. Inside, there was no jewelry. There were no stacks of cash. There was just a thick envelope and a leather-bound journal. I opened the envelope first. It contained the original deed of trust for the Alpha Fidelity Grandmother's Trust. I scanned the legal jargon until I found the disbursement clause, to be distributed in full to the granddaughter of the grantor, Lucille Marie Hughes, upon her 30th birthday, provided she is of sound mind and legal standing, and underneath that, paper-clipped to the back, was a letter. It was dated 20 years ago. I would have been 10. The letterhead belonged to a law firm I didn't recognize, one that had likely dissolved years ago. Dear Robert, regarding your inquiry about amending the birth certificate of the child currently in your care, we strongly advise against this action at this time. While you have expressed concerns about the child's biological origins following the hospital discrepancy you discovered, formally correcting the record would legally sever her status as the named beneficiary in your mother's trust. The trust explicitly names Lucille Marie Hughes. If you change her name or legal status, the funds, approximately $2 million, will bypass your control and be donated to the charitable remainder entity as per your mother's secondary instructions. Our recommendation is to maintain the status quo until the disbursement date. At that time, once the funds are released to the beneficiary, you can arrange for a transfer of assets within the family. I read the letter 3 times. My breath hitched in my throat. They knew. They had known for 20 years. They had found out I wasn't their daughter when I was 10, probably during a routine medical checkup or blood test, and they had consulted a lawyer. They had a choice. Tell me the truth and lose the money, or lie to me for 2 decades and keep the cash. They chose the cash. They didn't keep me because they loved me. They kept me because I was the human key to a $2 million vault, and the moment the clock struck 30, the moment I became the legal owner of that money, they needed to break me so I would hand it over. I put the letter back in the envelope. I felt a cold, hard rage settling in my chest, replacing the fear that had been living there for days. I wasn't a daughter. I was an escrow account. I closed the box and walked out of the bank. I called Thorne. I have it, I said. I have the smoking gun. Excellent, Thorne said. Now, let's set the table. We didn't send a legal summons. That would have put them on the defensive. Instead, I sent an email to my father. CC-ing my mother. Subject: Mediation and Settlement, Dad. Mom, I have been thinking about what you said. You are right. I don't belong in that house, and I don't want to fight you. I am ready to sign the waiver and discuss the separation terms. I just want to move on. Please meet me at the Ellington Conference Center, Room B, tomorrow at 8:30 in the morning. I want to get this done before your meeting with Alpha Fidelity. Lucy, it was the perfect bait. It played into their ego. It confirmed their narrative that I was weak, that I was broken, that I was ready to fold. 8:30 gave them just enough time to bully me into signing the waiver before they walked into the bank at 9 to collect the prize. They replied 4 minutes later, "We will be there." Do not be late. The Ellington Conference Center was a neutral ground, beige walls, generic art, and a long mahogany table that screamed serious business. We arrived at 7 in the morning to prepare the battlefield. Thorne sat at the head of the table. I sat on his right. Harper sat on his left. But we weren't alone. In the corner, sitting in a plush armchair with a cup of tea, was Mrs. Loretta Gable. She looked nervous but determined, her hands clutching her purse. She was our ghost from the past, and sitting next to Thorne was a man in a sharp navy suit. He had silver hair and the kind of posture that suggested he played golf with senators. Mr. Sterling, I said, nodding to him. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Arthur Sterling was the senior account manager at Alpha Fidelity. He was the man my father was scheduled to meet at 9 o'clock. When I had called him yesterday and explained that there was a potential security breach regarding the Hughes Trust, he had been very interested. When I told him I had documents proving an intent to defraud his firm, he cleared his schedule. Ms. Hughes? Sterling said, his voice smooth and professional. If what you say is true, your father is attempting to weaponize my bank against you. We take fiduciary responsibility very seriously. I am here to observe. If he presents a forged document, he will not be leaving this room with a check. He will be leaving with security. He will present it, I said. He is too arrogant not to. At 8:25, the door opened. My parents walked in. They looked impeccable. My father was wearing his closer suit, charcoal gray, silk tie. My mother was in a cream-colored dress that made her look like a benevolent angel. They walked with the confidence of people who had already won. Lucy, my father said, not even looking at the other people in the room yet. I am glad you came to your senses. It is a tragedy. Really. But we need to... He stopped. He saw Harper. His eyes widened. He hadn't expected the replacement to be sitting next to the defect. Then he saw Thorne, a lawyer. That was annoying, but manageable. Then he saw the man in the navy suit. I watched recognition flicker across my father's face. He knew Arthur Sterling. He had probably Googled him 100 times in preparation for his 9 o'clock meeting. Mr. Sterling? My father stammered. I have an appointment with you at 9, at your office. Ms. Hughes invited me to join this preliminary discussion, Sterling said, folding his hands on the table. She suggested that since all parties are present, we could expedite the verification process regarding the trust disbursement. My father's jaw tightened. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. He realized he wasn't walking into a surrender. He was walking into an audit. This is a private family matter, my mother hissed, stepping forward. Lucy, what is this? Who are these people? These are the truth. Mom, I said. My voice was steady. I didn't feel like crying. I felt like a judge. You wanted a trial? You wanted to put everything on the table? Okay, let's do it. I slid the real DNA report across the table. This is a certified DNA test from a forensic lab, I said. It confirms I am not your biological daughter. My father let out a breath, a small smirk returning to his lips. See? We told you. You are admitting it. Read the second page, Thorne said. My father frowned. He flipped the page. It also confirms, Thorne continued, that the document you presented 3 days ago contained markers that do not exist in the human genome. It was a forgery, and presenting a forged document to explain a financial separation is fraud. That was an illustrative aid, my father sputtered. The results were the same. And this, I said, sliding the next document across the table. It was the copy of the hospital log Mrs. Gable had helped us find, the one with the whiteout. This is the birth log from Mercy General, I said. It shows that 2 babies were born that night, one with bracelet 089, one with bracelet 090. It shows that someone altered the record to swap them. I pointed to the corner of the room. And this is Mrs. Gable, I said, the nurse you ordered to make the switch. My mother gasped. She turned and looked at the old woman in the armchair. Mrs. Gable didn't shrink away. She met my mother's gaze with a sad, steady look. "Hello, Elaine," Mrs. Gable said. I kept the notebook. My mother collapsed into a chair. She looked like the strings had been cut. "This is ridiculous," my father snarled, though his face was turning a dangerous shade of red. "So what? Even if there was a swap, which I deny, it proves Lucy isn't our daughter. It proves she has no claim to the family money. The trust is for our granddaughter, not a stranger." He pointed a finger at me. "You are nothing. You are a mistake." "Actually," I said, "I am the investment vehicle you use to secure your lifestyle." I placed the final document on the table, the letter from the safety deposit box. "You knew," I said. "You knew 20 years ago. You consulted a lawyer. He told you that if you told the truth, you would lose access to the grandmother's trust, so you kept me. You raised a stranger because you needed a warm body to keep the account open." I looked at Mr. Sterling. "They didn't just lie to me," I said to the banker. "They lied to Alpha Fidelity. They maintained a fraudulent guardianship for 2 decades to ensure the funds wouldn't be donated to charity. And now, they are trying to discard the vessel so they can claim the cash." Mr. Sterling picked up the letter. He read it. His expression went from polite interest to cold fury. "Mr. Hughes," Sterling said, "this letter indicates a conspiracy to defraud the trust. You knowingly withheld information regarding the beneficiary's status to prevent the triggering of the charitable remainder clause." "That letter is privileged," my father shouted. "You can't use that." "It was in a joint safety deposit box," Thorne said calmly. "Lucy had every right to retrieve it." My father looked around the room. He looked at Harper, who was watching him with absolute disgust. He looked at Mrs. Gable. He looked at the banker who held his financial future in his hands. He realized the walls had closed in. There was no exit. "I did what I had to do," my father whispered. It was a confession. The business was failing. Mother's money, it was the only way to save the house, to save everything. "You didn't save everything," I said. "You lost the only 2 things that actually mattered." I looked at Harper. She nodded. "You wanted a daughter," I said. "Well, here she is. Harper is your biological child. She is the one you should have raised, but you threw her away because she was sickly, and you kept me because I was profitable." "And now," Harper said, her voice cutting through the room, "neither of us wants you." Mr. Sterling stood up. He pulled a cell phone from his pocket. "Mr. Hughes," he said, "I am freezing the trust pending a full internal investigation, and given the nature of this document," he held up the fake DNA test my father had brought to the meeting, intending to use it later, "I am legally obligated to report this attempted fraud to the authorities." My father slumped into his chair. He looked small, the giant who had dominated my life, who had billed me for my own existence, was just a desperate man in a suit he couldn't afford. I stood up. I felt light. The weight of the last few days, the weight of the last 30 years, was gone. "The meeting is over," I said. "You have your answer. Dad, you have your audit." I turned to Harper. "Ready to go?" "More than ready," she said. We walked out of the conference room together, leaving my parents sitting in the wreckage of their own design, faced with a lawyer, a banker, and a witness who remembered everything. They had set a trap for me, hoping I would disappear. Instead, they had just confessed to the world that they were the ones who never really existed. The conference room was silent, but it was not the empty, hollow silence of the kitchen 3 nights ago. This was a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind that happens when a bomb has been disarmed, but everyone is still staring at the wires. My father sat across from me, his hand still resting near the dossier he had brought, the one containing the forged DNA results. He had walked in here like a general, expecting a surrender. Now, he looked like a man realizing he was standing on a trapdoor. He tried one last time to regain control. He cleared his throat, adjusting his silk tie, attempting to summon the voice that had commanded boardrooms for 3 decades. "This is all very dramatic," he said, waving a hand dismissively at the documents I had laid out. The real DNA test, the hospital logs, the letter from the safety deposit box. "But it is irrelevant. The fact remains, Lucy, that you are not our blood. You are a stranger, and as a stranger, you have no claim to the Hughes family trust. That money belongs to our granddaughter, our biological granddaughter." He gestured toward Harper, who was sitting next to me, her arms crossed, her expression made of stone. "We are simply correcting an error," he continued, his eyes darting to Arthur Sterling, the representative from Alpha Fidelity. "Mr. Sterling, surely you understand. We cannot disburse a multi-million-dollar inheritance to a woman who committed identity fraud by impersonating an heir." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I felt a strange, cold calm washing over me. It was the calm of the courtroom. "I didn't impersonate anyone," I said. My voice was low, but it carried to every corner of the room. "You impersonated a parent." I pushed the letter from the safety deposit box closer to Mr. Sterling. "They knew," I said to the banker. "They knew for 20 years. They kept me in their house, let me use their name, and signed legal documents as my guardians, knowing full well I wasn't their child. They waited until the clock ran out." Mr. Sterling picked up the letter. He read it slowly, his face impassive. Then he placed it down and looked at my father. "Mr. Hughes," Sterling said, "you seem to misunderstand the terms of the trust your mother established. It is an irrevocable instrument. It names Lucille Marie Hughes as the beneficiary. It does not say, 'the biological offspring of Robert Hughes.' It names a person, a legal entity," my father scoffed. "A person who doesn't exist. She is a fraud." "She is the person you raised," Sterling corrected sharply. "And legally, she is the person named in the documents you filed for 30 years. But here is the problem you have created for yourself." Sterling leaned forward. "If you prove that Lucy is a stranger," he said, "and if you successfully strip her of the name Lucille Marie Hughes, you do not inherit the money, you trigger the default clause." My father froze. "The what?" "The default clause," Sterling repeated. "If the named beneficiary is incapacitated, deceased, or disqualified due to fraud, the funds are not returned to the family. Your mother was very specific about that. She didn't trust you with the principal. Mr. Hughes, if Lucy is removed, the entire trust, all $5 million of it, is immediately liquidated and donated to the feline rescue charity your mother loved." The color drained from my father's face so fast it looked like a physical injury. My mother let out a small, strangled sound. "Cats?" my father whispered. $5 million to cats? "Unless," Sterling said, "Lucille Marie Hughes signs a voluntary release, unless she legally transfers her rights to a designated successor." The room seemed to tilt. My father looked at me. The arrogance was gone. The anger was gone. In their place was naked, desperate greed. He realized the trap he had built. He couldn't just kick me out. He needed me. He needed my signature to move the money from Lucille to Harper before the bank gave it to the shelter. "Lucy," he said. His voice cracked. He reached across the table, his hand trembling. "Lucy, listen to me. We can fix this. Just sign the paper. Sign the waiver. We will give you a cut. We will give you 10%. That is $500,000. You can start over. You can go away and have a nice life." "A cut?" I repeated. "You are offering me a commission on my own life?" "We just need you to confirm you are not the heir," he shouted, losing his composure completely. "We need you to sign the paper so we can give it to Harper. It stays in the family. Harper is your sister. Sort of. You wouldn't take money away from her, would you?" He pivoted to Harper, flashing a desperate, manic smile. "Harper, tell her. Tell her you want your birthright. We can be a family. We can fix all of this." Harper stood up. The chair scraped against the floor. a harsh sound that made my mother flinch. Harper looked at the man who had fathered her, then at the woman who had birthed her. She looked at the expensive suits, the desperate eyes, the hollow souls. "I am not your birthright," Harper said. Her voice was shaking, not with fear, but with fury. "And I am not your second chance." She walked around the table until she was standing right in front of my father. "I grew up wondering why I wasn't wanted," Harper said. "I spent my whole life thinking there was something wrong with me. But listening to you today, watching you try to bargain with Lucy like she's a used car, I realize I was the lucky one. You didn't throw me away. You saved me." "Harper, please," my mother begged. "We did it for the family." "You don't have a family," Harper said. "You have a business, and you just went bankrupt." She turned to me. "I don't want the money, Lucy. Not if it comes from them. Not if it means I have to sit at their table and pretend this is normal." "You won't have to," I said. I looked at Mr. Sterling. "I am Lucille Marie Hughes," I said. "My birth certificate says so. My driver's license says so. And the 30 years of receipts my father kept say so. I am the beneficiary." "You are," Sterling agreed. "The bank recognizes you as the sole claimant." "Good," I said. "Then I want to issue my first instruction as the owner of the trust." My father's eyes lit up with a flicker of hope. He thought I was going to negotiate. He thought I was going to keep the money and maybe, just maybe, cut him a check to keep the house. "Freeze it," I said. My father's mouth fell open. "What?" "Freeze the assets," I told Sterling. "Initiate a full external audit of the last 30 years of guardianship. I want to know every penny that was spent. I want to know about the loan my father took out in my name. I want to know about the credit cards. I want a forensic accounting of my entire existence." "That will take months," Sterling warned. "Years, maybe. The funds will be locked. No one will be able to touch them." "I know," I said. I looked at my parents. "You wanted to live by the spreadsheet? Fine. Let's look at the numbers. Every single one of them. And while the lawyers are looking, you don't get a dime. You don't get the payout to cover your mortgage. You don't get the cash to hide your debt." "You can't do this," my father screamed. He slammed his hand on the table. "I raised you. I fed you. You owe me." "I don't owe you anything," I said, standing up. "You presented me with a bill for $300,000, remember? Well, consider the trust fund my payment, and consider the audit my receipt." I picked up my bag. I picked up the real DNA test. "You gave me 1 hour to leave your house," I said. "I am leaving now, but I'm taking the name with me. I am taking the money with me, and I'm taking the daughter you actually wanted with me." I nodded to Harper. She fell into step beside me. My parents sat there, frozen in the wreckage of their scheme. My mother was weeping now, silent, ugly tears that ruined her makeup. My father was staring at the wall, his face gray, realizing that the house of cards had not just fallen, it had incinerated. He had played the game of his life, and he had lost to the two people he thought were pawns. We walked out of the conference room. We walked down the long hallway, past the secretaries, past the security guard. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the building and stepped out into the morning air. It was crisp and cold. The wind bit at my cheeks, but for the first time in 30 years, it didn't feel like a chill. It felt like oxygen. I looked down at my hands. They were empty. I wasn't holding a bottle of cheap wine. I wasn't holding a dossier of lies. I wasn't holding the weight of their expectations. Harper stood next to me, taking a deep breath. "So," she said, looking at the skyline, "you just froze $5 million. It seemed like the responsible thing to do," I said, a small smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. "Compliance, you know. Gotta follow the rules." "What do we do now?" she asked. I looked at her. I saw the sister I never knew I had, and the friend I desperately needed. "Now," I said. "Now we go get breakfast. I think I can afford it." I walked toward my car, my heels clicking on the pavement. A steady, rhythmic sound that sounded nothing like a ticking clock. I was 30 years old. I had no parents. I had a messy, complicated legal battle ahead of me. But as I unlocked the door, I realized something profound. They had tried to turn me into a line item. They had tried to erase me. But in the end, they were the ones who had been zeroed out. I was Lucy Hughes, and I was priceless. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It was a long journey from that cold kitchen floor to the freedom of this morning. And I am so glad I could share it with you. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening on your commute, at the gym, or maybe while organizing your own life? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please make sure to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button and smash the hype button so more people can hear the truth. Until next time, remember, know your worth and never let anyone treat you like a discount.